Hi, this is Mark from LongIslandWatch.com and welcome to another episode of Watch and Learn. Today I'd like to take some time and talk to you about watch illumination. Basically, glow in the dark. When you look at your watch and it's low light, you can see the hands, hopefully, if it's got luminescence on it. So I want to take time to discuss luminescence in general, really the two major kinds that we come across. And then at the end of the video, I'll do a time lapse between two different technologies of watch looms so you can see the differences rather than just hear me talk about it. You can kind of see it in action. So I guess I should do a wrist check, right? So, whoops, Seiko Sarb 033, and then Zin U1, quite the monster. So there's really, I guess there's three kinds of watch luminescence. There's photoluminescence, there's radioluminescence, and there's electroluminescence. And electro I'm really not going to talk about. That's your Timex Indiglo. That's your light on a watch. You press a button. It's quartz activated. It's battery driven, and it powers a little light. Maybe the dial lights up or a little light shines on the dial, whatever it is. That's electroluminescence. Self-explanatory. Nothing really to say there. But the two types of lume that I think are most important, especially for analog watches, watches with hands, are the photoluminescence and the radioluminescence. So I'm going to really talk mostly about radioluminescence because that's the one with the most history, and that's the one almost that basically gave birth to photoluminescence because of all the issues surrounding it. So radioluminescence, like the name suggests, is radioactive. It truly is. Nowadays, and I'll talk about it later, we have watches by Tracer that contain tritium, which are radioactive, and they truly are radioactive 100%. They are regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States. It is no joke. But let's start in the beginning. So we're going to go back to the early 1900s when there was a need for people to see things in the dark, maybe their watch dials and watch hands, and it was discovered by Marie Curie that radium, which is a naturally mined element, when it sits by itself, it glows. Little did they know that radioactivity was extremely harmful. Anyway, so they were able to basically pigmentize radium, and they would paint it onto dials and hands, and thus you could read the time in low light or at nighttime. And again, not realizing that there were adverse effects on human health. So it went around like this for a long time. Now, radium has a half-life. I'm going to say half-life a few times. Half-life of around 1,600 years. And what half-life means is that after that elapsed time, roughly 1,600 years, about half of the radioactivity in radium is gone, which obviously is way out of our scale. But mostly it's so active that it kind of decays itself, and it decays the phosphors that are in it that make it glow. So usually radium dials had to be repainted every so often because they start to degrade themselves. But the way most radioluminescence works is you have a radioactive substance. In this case, we're talking about radium. And then they take phosphors, which are materials that, when excited, release light. If you probably have them, maybe if you work in an office, you see fluorescent tubes. I know they're being phased out and replaced by LEDs. But those fluorescent tubes that were so, so much in office buildings in the 80s and 90s worked on kind of the same principle. You excited a coating on the inside of the glass, and it gave out visible light. So radioactivity is the same. Radioluminescence is the same thing. You are exciting this coating. You can't see radioactivity, but you excite this phosphor coating, and the phosphor is what gives off the light. So obviously the main benefit of radioactive luminescence is that it never needs to be charged. It's radioactive. It produces its own energy. Of course, it dies and degrades over time, half-life. So it's not a perpetual motion machine of any, of any sort. So we're not violating any thermodynamics principles. But it is self-powering in that respect. It has its own gas tank. So now we'll fast forward a few decades, and we'll get into, close to wartime, 40s, 50s. And now we go to these factories where radium is used used on watches. It's also used on gauges, dials, maybe in tanks or vehicles, so you can see them at night. So then the famous Radium girls came into play, and these were the women that were hired to artistically brush on this radium material onto whatever the substrate was. And what they were taught to do was point their brushes, like you see it, like an artist's brush. They were taught to rub it against their lips or their tongue to make the bristles into a fine point, so they could really paint, very straight and uncluttered lines or numbers. But unfortunately, they were at this point now ingesting radium. And again, hey, it's not bad for you. Don't worry about it. This is good stuff. It's gonna, make you feel, it'll make you good. Don't worry about it. One of the many lies told along the way. I guess they really didn't understand what was going on. Marie Curie, who I said in the beginning, eventually died of radiation poisoning, which is ironic. You'll hear me talk about Millie Curie's later. That's the unit of radiation, and it is named after her. But anyway, so after all these years of these women, pointing their brushes in their mouth, a lot of them developed mouth cancer, cancer of the throat, and they unfortunately passed away. And then soot was brought, and basically by the 60s, radium was more or less eradicated as a radioluminescent source, but you can certainly still find examples out there, I'm sure, of dials that were painted with radium, and they look really degraded and shoddy due to just the time and the degradation that happened over time. So the hunt became the hunt was on for a less radioactive or more safely radioactive material, and they stumbled upon tritium. So tritium is another radioactive material, and now that is the material that you hear us talk about in today's gas tube watches: Tracer, Ball, Luminox, Night, Armor Light, Isobright, all those watches. Anyone that uses gas tubes uses tritium. But before there were tritium tubes, there was tritium paint. And so what they found was they could take tritium and they could, again, pigment it, mix in phosphors, and paint it onto dials. And again, it is radioactive. It illuminates the phosphors. You can see it, and it is fairly safe. The way that tritium decays is it releases an electron, a little bit of energy, and that electron cannot permeate. I have never tried it myself. Cannot penetrate a piece of paper. It dies. You can't even get through the first couple of layers of your skin. So it's a relatively safe material. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can breathe it. You don't want to breathe it in. So it was applied, under certain conditions where, obviously safety. We kind of knew more at this point. Now we're in the 70s and 80s. We knew more. So safe application of tritium. Dials were painted. You may see Swiss made on the bottom of some watch dials, and there's T's next to it. T indicates the presence of tritium. T25 indicates that the entire watch radiates no more or at a maximum of 25 millicuries of radiation. But tritium now has a half-life of a little over 12 years. So after around one half-life's time, 12 years, the radiation is half as much. Does that correlate to half as much brightness? Not really. I believe it degrades even more because you have more inert materials. But tritium does degrade over years, and after maybe 1 or 2 decades, tritium paint did have to be reapplied. Now, one of the benefits of tritium paint, and you may see this on the web, is that when the paint degrades, when the pigments degrade, they actually take on a nice patina. So maybe it doesn't glow anymore, but it gets like this yellowish brown hue that people just lust over. There's nothing worse than you could do than take an 80s Submariner that's got beautifully degraded Lume and then slap on fresh Lume paint. You basically just destroyed all the value of the watch because people love that warm hue that the paint gives off. And a lot of current watches today, new ones that are manufactured, the Lume is actually already patinaed. Because what we'll get into later, photoluminescence doesn't really patina, at least in our lifetime. So what is tritium? Tritium is an isotope of hydrogen. Hydrogen is abundant in our atmosphere. It is a naturally occurring gas. But what tritium is hydrogen that's got 2 neutrons jammed into the nucleus. So you've got 1 proton and 2 neutrons, atomic weight of, I guess that's 3 from what I remember. But in its radioactive decay process, from hydrogen, it creates helium, another isotope of helium, and it releases an electron and a little bit of energy. So that's the degradation, the radioactive decay, as it is, of tritium. So it's much safer. It's a beta decay. A little electron comes out. Again, if it's airborne, it's not going to affect you at all if you breathe it in. Different story. The company that manufactures tracer watches that we sell, MB Microtech, they have an excellent website, and they talk about their trigger lights and what the different radiation levels are, and they basically say that, you know, the radiation of a lot of naturally occurring items is more than tritium. You know, like the radiation from a banana is more than the radiation from a tube bursting in front of your face. But that's gaseous tubes, so let's get on to gaseous tubes. So now we're in the 90s, and you know, tritium was much better than radium, but it's still radioactive, and we don't like that. We don't want to see that. We don't want to touch it. So we now enter into the 90s. Technologies are really advancing, and we take tritium, and instead of pigmenting it into a paint, we atomize it, and we turn it into a gas. We shove it into a gas tube, seal the end with a laser. The gas tube has phosphor coated on the inside of it, now really like a fluorescent tube like I talked about in the beginning, and that is what they call a GTLS. I really hate this acronym. GTLS, Gaseous Tritium Light Sources. And these are the little tubes that are not only on watch hands. I'm not wearing a tracer today because actually I have a marathon, but it needs repair. I got to repair the crystal. But not only is it on watches, and it's on the hands, the tubes are on the hands, the tubes are on the indices, it's in gun sights, it's on gauges, it's on anything that might need a light source that doesn't normally get any kind of external power. So tritium tubes, as they're manufactured, are these GTLSs, or trigger lights is what Tracer calls them. You know, with chemistry, they can use different phosphors and create different colors: reds, blues, greens, oranges. And maybe I'll do another video at another time where we show how really, I believe green is the most powerful light. Same amount of radiation inside, but your eyes can pick up green, the wavelength of green, the best out of all of them, so it appears the brightest. But then you get into watches that you might hear about T25s or T100s, excuse me. And what that means is the amount of radiation that the watch contains. T25 means it is 25 millicuries or less. T100s contain 100 millicuries or less of radiation emanating, of radioactive material. Not emanating because it's stuck in the glass. Are T100s better than T25s? No, they're just brighter. But what that does mean is that over time, obviously, a T100 watch will stay brighter longer because it's got more gas in it to illuminate the phosphor. It doesn't mean T100 is necessarily better or worse, usually more expensive, because tritium in and of itself is expensive. I should have mentioned tritium is naturally occurring, but very rare, rarefied in the upper atmosphere. They manufacture it through, I think it's lithium, when I read, another process where they can bombard lithium and create tritium gas to shove into these tubes. And that's basically the conclusion, I guess, of radioluminescence. So we started with radioactive radium paint, we went into radioactive tritium paint, and then we've settled on these radioactive tritium gas lights. So now with these gas lights, obviously the gas is in a tube, and the radiation, the electron that's bounced out through beta decay, cannot exit the tube. It's stuck in there, so it is safe. If you broke a tube under your nose and breathed it in deeply, probably not the best idea in the world, ill-advised. But let's say your watch is on your wrist and it got smashed and the tubes break. It's fine. Within a few seconds, the tritium gas is going to disperse. It's going to immediately want to go into equilibrium with its surroundings. It's going to be rarefied, and it's not going to be harmful anymore. So this is the way that tritium is now handled. And like I said before, I think I said in one of my other videos, the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, really this is no joke. They strictly monitor all the tritium that comes into this country from, say, Switzerland, where MB Microtech is, and you need a license to import this stuff, and so rightfully so, it's kept under very tight control. So while all this is going on in the 80s and 90s, companies start to think, you know what, we need a safe alternative to this radioluminescence, and that is where photoluminescence comes from. You may hear the two biggest terms, I guess, are SuperLuminova, which is a made by a Swiss company, excuse me, and Lumibrite, which is made by Seiko. Both compounds are pretty much the same. What they are they're just glow-in-the-dark compounds. Instead of being radioactive, it needs to be illuminated to charge up. So you take any of these watches like this Zin, and you shine a bright light on the photoluminescent compound. It absorbs the light. Doesn't take long under a bright light for it to be fully charged. A matter of, I'd say, it's probably less than, I'm going to say 30 seconds, but it's probably much less than 30 seconds. And the pigment and the material that stores the energy, it sucks up all the light energy that it can, and then it basically goes through its own release cycle, and it releases it slowly. So what are the downfalls? So now it's totally safe. Like I said, though, it doesn't patina over time. So if you're looking for, oh, my watch with SuperLume is 30 years. Let's say it's the year 2020 something. And you look at it, and the SuperLume is probably just as white or green as it was when you first started. But it's still luminescent as long as you charge it. But the problem is that within about an hour, most glow-in-the-dark stuff, whether it be SuperLume, Lumibrite, or any other cheap imitation, within the first hour, it loses around 90% of its brightness. Whereas your radioluminescence does not need charging. It continues to emit light constantly throughout its life, forever. Now, we talked about half-lives before. They say half-life. It's not life. So in 12 years, tritium is half as radioactive as it was. Well, guess what? In another 12 years, it's half again, half again, half again. So it's radioactive forever. Of course, eventually your eyes will not be able to pick it up, but it's always radioactive. Photoluminescence, on the other hand, constantly needs to be charged. So the way it really works, and this is where when I do the time-lapse thing with the Lume, you'll be able to check it out. But the way it's really meant to work is you wear your watch all day, you go into a movie theater or whatever, for an hour or two, you can look down at your watch and you can discern the time, even with the ambient light from the movie screen in your eyes. See the time. Perfect. Now, let's go to the next time when it's dark out, at night when you go to sleep, and keep it on your nightstand. Hopefully away from a radio if you have one, because then we get into magnetic effects, and it's another watch to learn. You should check it out. You put it down, and it's been in light all day, and you go to sleep. After, like I said, like an hour or so, it loses most of its brightness. But that's okay, because now your eyes are closed. And your eyes are now, your pupils are dilating. You are much more receptive to low levels of ambient light. You wake up at 3 in the morning to go to the bathroom. Maybe like me. You can pick up your watch and look at it. And with what I like to tell people, adjusted eyes, yes, you can see the hands on a SuperLumed or a Lumibrite watch. No problem. 6 in the morning, maybe 7 or 8 hours later, yes. As long as your eyes are still adjusted and the room is dark, you will be able to see it. People will mistake this for, they get the watch and it's been sitting in a dark room for a day. They pick it up and they look at it. They just walk in from outside. They pick it up and look and they go, the Lume's broken on the watch. Doesn't work anymore. It's dead. No, your eyes need to be adjusted. The Lume needs to be charged. But, through a daily wearing cycle, the Lume does get charged. It gets charged every day and it discharges. There's really no life to it. It's not like a rechargeable battery. It'll constantly absorb and release energy as needed. Whereas with the Tritium watch, which this is not, but it's the other wrist, so I'm holding it up, the Tritium watch always glows. So in the event of the T25 watch, which is much more common than the T100, this is the antithesis, or the other side of what I get. People will buy a Tracer watch. They get it. They pick it up in a room that's lit like this. And they go, this thing doesn't glow. I don't see anything. I can't see anything. Run into a closet. It doesn't glow. I can't see anything. Well, if you're young enough, you will, because your eyes are still fairly receptive to light. But if you are older, you will not see it. Your eyes need to become adjusted to the darkness. The beauty of the Tritium watches is you can keep it buried under a mushroom for 5 years. You can pick it up in a dark room, and if your eyes are adjusted, you will easily see the time. So the beauty of Tritium is that it glows constantly. So if you look at it at 4 in the morning and your eyes are adjusted, no problem seeing it. But just again, if you were just in a bright daylight and then you run inside into a closet and you pick up the watch and you look at it, you may not see it glow because it's not that strong. But now, as you're going to see in the time lapse, as the Lumibrite dies, the tritium takes over. And how long does that take? Well, we'll just do an example. I'm going to take I guess I'll take, since I keep saying SuperLuminova Lumibrite, I'll take my Seiko Monster. I did a time lapse like this in a Tracer video, like I want to say like a year and a half or 2 years ago, but I didn't do it under the Watch and Learn. So I want to do it again, and hopefully we can do it with a little higher quality. I'm going to put a Tritium watch and radioluminescence and a photoluminescent, a Seiko, next to each other, side by side. We'll set them up, and I'm going to let them run for several hours, and we'll kind of take a look at different time frames and see when the lume degrades. As the lume degrades on the SuperLume, when the tritium takes over, and then eventually you'll see that the tritium at the end of the day just is the clear runaway winner. Okay, so truth be told, my shirt changed. We are now a few days after I shot that darkness footage. I actually shot it a few times. I couldn't get it dark enough. When I reviewed it, I didn't like it. And then I learned that I didn't have to film for 5 hours. After the first 30 minutes or so, you actually saw everything you needed to see. The SuperLuminova, or excuse me, the Lumibrite at Seiko. The Lumibrite went down and the tritium stayed rock solid. The tritium was probably brighter than the Lumibrite, before the end of the 30 minutes was up. Just little scientific disclaimers. Obviously, the camera is not your eyeball. It depends on the sensitivity, obviously, of the sensor that's inside the camera. But from a comparative sense, you can kind of see what's going on. So maybe it's not really 30 minutes. Maybe in practice it'll be an hour. I doubt it's going to be much more than that, where the tritium becomes brighter than the SuperLume or the Lumibrite. But nonetheless, I think you totally get where I'm coming from and what I was trying to show you. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video on talking about different kinds of illumination that wristwatches use. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. And if you have any questions or comments, please do put them down below, and I'll be sure to address them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.